Now you can open your eyes. Millions of Americans were once inspired to believe in love by Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz under the bright lights of I Love Lucy. They made audiences laugh until they sobbed, disagreed, and showed affection for one another. However, Lucille Ball's real life was drowning in tears behind the lights of the studio. She silently put up with drinking, betrayals, and excruciating miscarriages that almost broke her. Then, out of the blue, Gary Morton, a man 13 years her junior, appeared, sparking a romantic tale that astounded Hollywood. What then became of her? Furthermore, the public was unaware of how much more agonizing that life actually was. In 1911, Lucille Ball was born in Jamestown, New York. Because of her father's work, she had to relocate constantly throughout her youth. Because no place ever lasted long enough to feel like home, she was accustomed with loneliness from an early age due to that unpredictable upbringing. However, the most tragic event occurred when Lucille was just 3 years old. The family was devastated when her father passed away from typhoid sickness. And on the same day, the most bizarre thing occurred. Suddenly, a bird flew into the home, trapping inside. Lucille's dread of birds was so intense that it plagued her for decades after the incident. Lucille Ball's mother remarried Edward Peterson 4 years after her father passed away and relocated in search of employment. Lucille and her younger brother were sent to live with their stepmothers during that period. They were a rigorous couple from Sweden who adhered to stringent Puritan principles. With the exception of a tiny mirror in the bathroom, there were hardly any mirrors in the house. Lucy was severely reprimanded for being overly conceited after she was found staring at herself in the mirror one day. Those cruel remarks gradually caused Lucille to become extremely self-conscious, leaving her with emotional wounds that persisted for the most of her early years. However, that timid young girl harbored a strong want to be appreciated and cherished. Lucille's stepfather pushed her to participate in a Shriners Organization event when she was 12 years old, and the moment she stood in front of a crowd for the first time opened the door that would permanently alter her life. She was incredibly shy and found it difficult to blend in, despite the fact that the world would eventually perceive her as naturally hilarious. She received criticism at performing arts school for being an awkward dancer and a vocalist who lacked vocal control. Teachers' predictions that she would fail miserably in the entertainment business intensified the criticism. They even sent Lucille's mother a letter accusing her of squandering the time of the school. Lucille was virtually invisible, while the exceptional pupils shone brightly. Lucille Ball, who was once thought to have no future in entertainment, never gave up on her ambition. Her incredibly strong resolve took the place of her lack of confidence. Lucille returned to New York in 1928 with the intention of disproving everyone's underestimations of her. She started earning a career as a model at the time and had mesmerizing beauty and eye-catching blue eyes. It's interesting to note that Lucille had not yet embraced her signature fiery red hair. Instead, in an attempt to learn how to look more attractive and self-assured in public, she colored her hair platinum blonde. However, Lucille's life never appeared simple. She had a serious case of rheumatic fever just as her career was about to take off, and she had to stop working for almost 2 years. That might have been the end of an artistic dream for many, but Lucille was determined not to give up. Following her recuperation, she pursued acting, changed her stage name to Diane Belmont, and started making appearances in Broadway shows. But those modest early victories soon vanished as she was continually let go from positions. After making a few small-scale appearances in Hollywood during the 1930s, Lucille was dubbed the Queen of the Movies due to her numerous low-budget roles. When Lucille Ball met Desi Arnaz in 1940 while filming Too Many Girls, her life was drastically altered. After just a few months of dating, they secretly wed after falling in love. However, there was a tearful marriage hidden underneath that intense infatuation. Lucille was so hurt by Desi's alcoholism, frequent infidelity, and frequent intoxication that she filed for divorce in 1944. Nevertheless, ultimately made the decision to make amends. Lucille's career was irrevocably altered by her choice to remain with Desi. She became well known in the late 1940s thanks to the radio program My Favorite Husband, and CBS intended to turn it into a television show. Lucille would only consent, though, provided Desi could portray her husband on TV. Television executives at the time thought that a white woman married to a Cuban man would never be acceptable to American viewers. Refusing to give up, Lucille and Desi started Desilu Productions in order to produce an I Love Lucy pilot. The duo performed comedy and musical acts together while touring several cities to demonstrate their popularity. Audiences were immediately won over by those performances, which demonstrated their innate chemistry and distinct appeal. In the end, the tour's success convinced CBS to rethink its mind, which led to the creation of I Love Lucy. Lucille Ball's life took a completely different turn once she persuaded CBS to let Desi Arnaz co-star with her in I Love Lucy. The show's innate wit, charm, and most importantly, the real chemistry between the married couple on television immediately made it a national sensation. The awkward and endearing Lucy Ricardo was not the only thing that audiences adored. The impression that they were seeing Lucille and Desi's true love story behind the scenes also enthralled them. However, few were aware that the laughter concealed a marriage that was becoming more and more strained every day. Lucille was quietly going through terrible hardships that the audience was unaware of while the program was at the pinnacle of its popularity. Despite her intense desire to have children, she experienced several miscarriages. She was physically and psychologically distraught by those recurrent setbacks, especially as she was getting close to 40, an age at which Hollywood at the time frequently thought a woman's career was starting to decline. When she gave birth to her first daughter, Lucy Arnaz, in 1951, she finally found pleasure after years of yearning. It was more than just being a mother for Lucille. After all the suffering she had borne in silence, it felt like a reward. After just a year and a half, Lucille became pregnant once more, giving birth to her son, Desi Arnaz, Jr. However, this pregnancy would lead to a revolution in the history of American television. Pregnancy was practically prohibited on television at the time. Executives at CBS felt that the term pregnant was too delicate for family viewers. Therefore, they would not even permit it to be said on the air. But Lucille and Desi realized that because their music was authentic, audiences like it. They therefore made the decision to include Lucille's actual pregnancy in the show's plot. It was a daring choice that Hollywood had never seen before. After much discussion, finally consented, but insisted that the more gentle phrase expecting be used in place of the word pregnant. Using a French term to avoid immediate conflict, the well-known episode Lucy is on S'il vous plaît became a significant cultural event. Over 44 million Americans watched Lucy Ricardo give birth on television on the evening of January 19, 1953. The fact that Lucille actually gave birth to Desi Arnaz Jr. made the occasion remarkable. That day, in Los Angeles, America was thrown into a frenzy by the flawless convergence of reality and television. With over 71% of television viewers tuned in, the show smashed all previous records, even outpacing the attendance of the U.S. presidential inauguration at the time. From the outside, this seemed to be Lucille Ball's most ideal time of her life. She owned DeZulu Productions, one of the most influential production firms in Hollywood at the time, and had a family, 2 kids, and the top-ranked television program in America. However, behind the scenes, her marriage to Desi was gradually being destroyed by the pressure of success. Desi was worn out from his heavy effort, yet his alcoholism and extramarital affairs never really ended. They started fighting more often, sometimes to the point where studio workers could hear them from a distance. The fact that Lucille continued to attempt to maintain the public's perception of their happy family and their kids may have been the most devastating aspect of her life. Lucy and Ricky Ricardo's endearing disagreements on film usually made viewers giggle before they swiftly reconciled. However, in reality, it was getting harder to mend the fissures in Lucille and Desi's marriage. Even while I Love Lucy was still a television classic by the end of the 1950s, their love had virtually run out of passion. Lucille formally filed for divorce on March 3, 1960, just one day after Desi's birthday and soon after the last Lucy-Desi Comedy Hour episode was filmed. She characterized her marriage as a nightmare in court-submitted documents, which contrasted sharply with the joyful portrayal of her marriage that America had seen on television for so long. For one of the most well-known couples in Hollywood, it was a tragic conclusion. However, despite all the pain, Lucille and Desi maintained their love and respect for one another to the end of their lives, which is what made their story so extraordinary. It's possible that they both realized in their hearts that, despite the failure of their marriage, they had contributed an indispensable to the history of American television. Just a year after her difficult divorce from Desi Arnaz, Lucille made a comeback to Broadway with the musical Wildcat. Even though the production did not end up being as successful in the long run as many had anticipated, it was a significant turning point that introduced her to the individuals who would have a lasting impact on her life. During this time, 13-year-old comic Gary Morton from the Borscht Belt comedy circuit was introduced to Lucille by actress Paula Stewart. Many people in their immediate vicinity first thought the relationship would never last. Gary was neither a great Hollywood celebrity nor the glamorous kind of man like Desi Arnaz. In reality, Lucille claims that Gary acknowledged that he had been too busy touring with his own comedic shows to see a single episode of I Love Lucy. However, it's possible that Lucille felt safe for the first time in a long time because of the simplicity and sincerity of the music. There were no more heated disputes, no more worries about adultery, and no more evenings spent waiting for her spouse to return home inebriated. In her first marriage, Lucille had never felt such tranquility as she did with Gary. On November 19, 1961, the two got married, and despite Hollywood's skepticism, they had a blissful marriage for the remainder of her life. Gary was swiftly integrated into Lucille's corporate operations at Desilu Productions. He was subsequently promoted to producer after she personally showed him how the television industry operated, from production to behind-the-scenes administration. Most significantly, Gary never tried to compete for the limelight. Instead, he always stayed by Lucille and supported her, even though he occasionally made brief appearances in her presentations. After years of living in the stressful and chaotic world of Hollywood, Lucille at last found a home that was genuinely stable. They split their time between residences in Snowmass Village, Colorado, Palm Springs, and Beverly Hills, locations where she could get away from the cacophony of the entertainment business, at least somewhat. Over time, Lucille's candid admission that Gary had been the best choice of her life